And thank you all for joining us. This is the Lake County Lake Lover third Thursday gathering, and we are focused on restoring the lakes of Lake County because 45% of our lakes are impaired according to the EPA, and we have discovered that our lakes are really orphans. So a citizen-led movement is what's been raised up with your support, and we have our third Thursday briefings to keep people apprised of content and experts, and hopefully see a way forward for our lakes. We invite your questions in the chat. I just wanted to let you know too that we will continue the conversation with our actual community, and the community you can access. I'm going to share my screen here and see the lake life, how to prevent and remediate HABs here in the community. It's got an FAQ. You can browse activities and find case studies. And you can also find information about our, oops, just a second. Screen's hiding here, about today's program, where we detail both the questions and the detail on the experts. All of the bios are here. And I put this in the chat. I'll add it again so anyone can join the community and add their comments. But our agenda tonight will focus on meeting the experts, learning from their experiences on muck munching and specific combinations of aeration and enzymes to completely restore and essentially bio-dredge our lakes. You'll have the chance to get answers to your questions, figure out your steps for follow-up, and connect if you want to with Jeff Boeckler, who's here from Northwater Company Consulting, and he is working specifically, we'll be sharing a project they did in Indiana, but he has a goal of purifying the Gulf Coast. We know about that dead zone, and it's a beautiful acknowledgement of our connected waters. So eager to hear from him in a moment, and to ensure that he can keep all those fish readily available for his fly fishing passion. And Dave Shackleton connected with us. We learned about his technology in India. So he was sharing the solutions for lake remediation there. He runs a company that he founded, SIS.BIO, Sustainable Infrastructure Systems, and has a beautiful story about the renewable water cycle. And I'm very delighted to have with us Wayne Carmichael, who happened to see the notice of the event and touch base with Dave as he saw in the Collaborate HABs group online, and an organization I recommend you join. But Wayne has been working for 50 years, and 2 years ago, we heard him present his idea for the future on HABs. For the last 50 years, they've been monitoring, but for the next 50 years, we can be restoring lakes because of the research he's done and observed, and the solutions that are now available. And in this page that you're linked to, you can find his keynote and the transcription of that, and also view the video presentation that he shared there. So I'm going to turn it over now to Jeff, so he can fill you in on the process that they took to actually look at how to measure the sediment and then test the varying solutions to see what they could achieve in Indiana. So thank you, Jeff, for joining us. Go ahead, and I think you should be able to share.
Okay. All right. Before I share the PowerPoint, just a few disclaimers about this, just so everybody knows. So number one, this is an older study. This started in 2015, so 2015 and 2016. So it is dated, and the products we tested are also dated. A lot has changed since then. Also, our particular client for this project had us working on all sorts of other watershed related work. So this was kind of a side study in preparation for doing some dredging that they ultimately did do. My background is in watershed management. Yes, I do work in reservoirs and lakes, but my expertise is really in the watershed management end of things. I'm not a biologist. I'm a environmental planner by trade, and do a lot more on the water. The lakes that we help manage is a lot more related to water quality than biology. So this happened to be really exciting opportunity to do a unique study, dive in with little to no guidance, and try and provide some advice to our client that was about to embark on a very costly dredging effort. So with that, and I will say also, I was one of my staff members really took the lead on this project, and although I know about it, I wasn't intimately involved in every single solitary aspect. So I may not be able to answer all your questions, and I'll stumble through this a little bit because it's not exactly what I know 100%. So I'll give it my best shot. Okay. Let's see here. All right, I'm assuming everybody can see that now.
Yep.
Or can see now. Okay, so Muck Munching, a 2-year feasibility study for in-lake organic sediment reduction and management in Upper Fish Lake, which is located in LaPorte County, Indiana. So this is northern Indiana. This is in the Kankakee River Basin. Everything north of here pretty much goes right in directly into Lake Michigan. The watershed for Fish Lake and Upper, Lower, and Fish Lake, and then Mud Lake, which is part of the Fish Lake chain in the southern portion of the map there. The watershed is small, 6,500 acres, very high quality watershed, lots of remnant and functioning and high quality wetlands. 2 main feeder creeks enter the lake, Fish and Mill Creek. And back in the day, this lake was used for peat mining until the early 1990s. And also there are stories of Al Capone frequenting the lake as well. Also, they did such pristine, clear water, they did ice mining as well way back in the day. Okay, so that's Fish Lake and its watershed. And we started off with the Fish Lake Conservancy District, who was our client. They had the taxing authority, actually, which is really cool. They levy taxes that goes into a pot of money, and they're able to do things just like this. In addition to other studies we've done for them, actually bankroll dredging, do watershed treatments, vegetation management in the lake. So we decided to take a look at the efficacy of using biological treatments in combination with aeration as an alternative to dredging. Very high organic content sediment, and we ended up choosing Upper Fish Lake, which is the most choked in lake of all 3 of them, Mud, Upper, and Lower Fish Lake. Primarily groundwater fed. There is surface water, but the water levels stay pretty stable even in a drought. Water quality is fantastic in this lake. They are having major issues with weed bed expansion later on in the summer, and obviously, because I'm talking about it, accumulation of organic muck. The lake itself is 126 acres in size. This is our study area, and this is the inflow from Fish Creek and Mill Creek. This is where we believe most of the accumulation has occurred, not only just from the vegetation that dies off in this particular area, but what's transported into the lake from the feeder streams as well. I mentioned before that large wetland complexes upstream. A lot of that migrates, we believe, migrates into the lake itself and is deposited in this wonderful spot right here. When we started off with the Fish Lake Conservancy District, we began with a lake diagnostic study and concluded through that sediment delivery to the lake from the watershed was very minimal, and that the majority of what's occurring in the lake itself is generated from within the lake. And so everything's really internally sourced. And our study showed, and some of our water quality monitoring showed, pretty consistent low dissolved oxygen near the sediment water interface. The muck itself, high organic content, lots of algae and Eurasian water milfoil in this particular area, but in the rest of the lake as well. And like I said, low dissolved oxygen. And with the limited benthic decomposition, you get the sediment buildup of this organic mucky type substance. there's always just this film of 6 inches or so of this flocculent muck that just hangs around and eventually deposits, and they're just consistently losing depth. So they had tasked us with figuring out if they could do something other than spend millions of dollars dredging to get some water depth back and recreational channels for boaters that are complaining about not being able to access their favorite fishing holes. So the idea was, and our hypothesis was, that lack of dissolved oxygen and or a lack of microorganisms is limiting the organic sediment decomposition and therefore resulting in the buildup of said sediment. So we crafted a study to test a combination of aeration and microbial treatments along with a control where we did nothing to see if that could measurably reduce that sediment. So we rented a solar bee, which may or may not have been the proper aeration unit to use, but that just happened to be the one that we got a deal on, right? Because we're looking for deals throughout this whole process. The Conservancy District is kind of concerned with costing, even though they do have a good budget. We also picked a product called Bio-Dredging Environoc 301 at the time. Just happened to be one of the folks that approached us with this idea and presented it. Originally, I thought this was snake oil, but nonetheless, we wanted to test it out and see if it actually did work. So this is our study area. We had on the lower southern part there, that's where the solar bee was located. Within that area, we had microbial treatment area, and in an area we did not do microbial treatment. On the other area, we had just dissolved oxygen sensors and treatment without aeration. And then, of course, a spot in the middle is a control where we did absolutely nothing. So over 2 years, 2015, 2016, between April and October, we measured dissolved oxygen, and every month injected these quote unquote bugs into the top 12-inch of sediment at 25-foot spacing. So typically they would apply that on the surface. We didn't think that was adequate, and we wanted to get that right to where that it needed to be working. So, and have a little bit more control over where that stuff went. So we decided to inject it into the sediment. We took sediment measurements using a pole with depth measurements on it and a plate at the bottom, so we could get a reasonable understanding of where we hit resistance and the true top of the sediment. Took sediment cores for visual density and organic content, and did some basic water quality and vegetation observations. This is everything that we utilize for this study. This, you can see the massive solar bee, the Environoc 301, the Hobo DO logger, our injection, and this was all custom built by Javen, our injection machine, and the sediment measurement tool. You can see the picture on the bottom right, I guess, that or your left maybe, of the injecting the product into the sediment. Soil cores mainly just for observation. As you can see, the color of them indicates very high organic content, typically at the upper end of the column. And lots of algae in the summertime, high vegetative output that dies and can't decompose adds to this condition. Or at least we believe it does. Pretty obvious it does. Lots of swings in dissolved oxygen over the study period. One of the key takeaways here is, over time, as the vegetation grew, the DO got worse, and actually the aeration became pretty much ineffective because it was getting choked out by the vegetation growth. So before, aeration was effective, and then the plant started growing, and that really tapered off. Conclusions, results: mechanical aeration we found does create better conditions for sediment decomposition. However, having that free water column and depth in our opinion, were critical factors in that particular aerator being effective. And maybe it is just the fact that we used a solar bee that operates different from a bubbler, for example. As you can see from the pictures, this is the typical vegetation growth, very thick lily pads, all sorts of stuff going on there that really didn't help well with the aeration portion. What we did find, though, is up to a 5-inch reduction of sediment when using aeration and bugs since 2050. So over 2 years, a 5-inch reduction. There might be a bit of an error in there just based on the very loose nature of that sediment and actually finding the actual top of it. There could be some error in there. But only effective with aeration, and alone, the bugs didn't seem to do anything. And that could be a function of the product doesn't actually work very well to begin with. But 2 in combination was the only situation where we saw results. Their conclusions: low DO, limiting the decomposition of sediment. Like I said, aeration with biological augmentation is probably most effective. You need that free water column, at least for this particular solar bee to work. Dredging, which they ended up doing, we recommended that this technique might be better as a maintenance effort post dredging rather than a solution to getting the sediment out of there quick enough. And so therefore, we recommended they continue doing this post dredging, which they haven't done, but we recommended it, which is not uncommon for a lot of our clients that hire us to advise them and then they don't do anything with our advice. We did some cost benefit analysis of dredging versus doing this. And if you get free labor based on the rates of sediment removal and the cost of the aerator and the cost of the product and everything else, it's fairly cost effective versus dredging to do this. It's just, does the Fish Lake Conservancy District have the labor to go out monthly, inject it, deal with that month after month after month? No, the answer is no. And that's why the very next project after this was to dredge several areas in the lake. It is key. Monitoring dissolved oxygen is important, like any lake restoration or restoration effort. Having the data to prove your hypothesis is very important, or not, or disprove it. No magic bullets, at least from our observation, and this could have changed because this was quite a while ago. Again, bugs need oxygen, vegetation types and density are critical to operation of any of the aeration system that we were working on. And for this particular lake in Indiana, this was more of a maintenance solution rather than a solution to just removing all the sediment. And that may be completely different in another lake that is about to be spoken about here. But in this one, we didn't think that this was the answer to all their sediment issues. And this just shows you a map of areas that we had planned to dredge, but they had some issues with the dewatering basin and contractors, and these areas got taken off of the list. But the same area where we had the study going. This is for your information, an aerial shot of the dewatering basin. Here's a shot of some of the sediment that ended up in it. And I think this still looks the exact same today as it did 3 or so years ago. That's it. And does anybody have any questions, or just hold the questions till after the second presentation and we can have a discussion after that?
Yeah, maybe if you could remove the screen,
Oh, yeah.
then that was excellent, Jeff, and very thorough approach. I like the fact that you reserve room for people to provide input on this. And I'm wondering if Wayne might just comment on the observations of what you saw, Wayne, and some of the comments Jeff had regarding the use of aeration alone with enzymes, or what you have observed and what you see from Jeff's story.
Yeah, just quickly, Jeff. I think your hypothesis was right on, in terms of what you were setting out to accomplish. I guess what I've seen over 50 years is I've seen all those methods worked one way or the other, whether it's chemical or aeration or flocculation or and it really comes down to how it's applied. And when solar bees came out, I was kind of impressed because I knew the person that was primarily developing them and selling them. But over time, what you see with the solar bees is they don't circulate in the right areas. They don't get down there and move those sediments or get air, because it's really oxygen in air that's important to get into that sediment. And I think that may be part of it. I don't know what's in that microbe mix, but as Dave will point out, sometimes it's better to use enzymes than microbes, just because you're not competing with the microbes that are already there. You want to get good microbes, and you don't really know what you're injecting. So I think that's where I see probably some of and depth is certainly important. I wasn't quite clear what your depths were, but Dave will certainly address that. So again, I
Only
think
about 4 feet, 4 to 6 feet. So
that's
yeah.
kind of iffy. But I think Dave can address that. But I think that's what I'm seeing. I think that the lake could work. I just most of these lakes potentially can, and I think the approach is good. Dredging, I'm just really, really concerned about dredging. It's a very expensive. It never ends, and what you want is a system that's going to remove those sediments and biologically, and then you don't have to go back and do a full-fledged decomposition. You can do a maintenance program, and if you establish the right microbes and the right algae and plants, then they do it for you. You don't have to come back all the time. So those are kind of my broad comments, but again, I think that the approach was good. So
they want a quick fix, right? That's the thing.
Well,
So
yeah.
dredging, they can see it, and yes, it costs a lot of money, but it's out of there. The idea for them of doing this long-term thing all over the lake where they're dealing with microbes and aeration and stuff, we just couldn't convince the board to even.
Yeah, and this is the biggest thing is selling your ideas, and until you've got some real positive cases to report on that really work and work long term, so yeah, selling the public or selling these groups is probably the hardest part.
Yeah. Thank you.
So Mary, we have 2 questions or 3 questions in the chat, and I'd maybe throw those out now, or
sure. Yeah.
But so the first one: how does the amount of deciduous leaves accumulating in a given lake compare to the inputs from aquatic vegetation, erosion, sediments, etc.? So leaves versus vegetation and erosion kind of stuff.
I guess it depends on the surrounding vegetation and what comes in. So certainly the in-lake vegetation is most likely going to be dominant. So
right. So then the next question, I think this goes to the presentation that was just given, was what was the organic percentage in the muck, I guess?
It varied, but the highest level I think was around 20%. Dave can also speak to that too, in terms of the way it's collected, but that's would be considered high. But it did range. I think some cores were only 5%.
And were there enzymes in the process you were using, Jeff?
I really don't know exactly what concoction is in that EnviroNoc 301. I don't know. I cannot answer that.
So, and maybe David, in your presentation, because I know you're dealing with enzymes, because the question is what classes of enzymes would be in the mix, so to speak, and as you go through your presentation. So those are the questions we've gotten so far. So with that, Mary, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, right. Well, we want to go right into Dave's presentation, but as he tees up, I do want to get everyone's input here on just our simple poll. I'm looking for the poll. Oops, I guess we'll do that after. I think we probably need to do it after when we're, oh, here it is. Quickie, to get your input based on what you see happening with a lake near you. If you could just identify, how would you rate the quality of the closest lake? Is it healthy? Is there excess muck or algae? Or is it closed for periods of time due to the level of impairment? Or don't you know? If everyone could just answer, even if you're not by a lake or don't own a lake, it's just good to get that assessment. Are we even aware? In Lake County, it's quite shocking to know that there are actually in excess of nearly 60. The majority of lakes are impaired with nutrients, and that's why we formed Lake County Lake Lovers. And Becky, before Dave tees up, you're here as co-chair. If you want to say anything more about Lake County Lake Lovers, since that's who's on.
So, hi everybody, I'm Becky. And I'm really thrilled with all the interest tonight in this program. Kudos, Mary and Frank, for putting this together and inviting everybody to have this conversation. I have been involved pretty recently and just assumed that all lakes were healthy and they all had a fairy godmother that took care of them, and there was plenty of resources. So it's been a really interesting journey to realize how impaired they are despite living in a county that's known for their lakes. It's Lake County. We have 173 lakes, not counting all of our other waterways. And our percentage is even higher than the national average for impairment. So without anyone really being responsible, it's really left to concerned citizens like us to collaborate and see what we might be able to do by working together, building synergy, inviting experts, influencing leaders, and perhaps even fundraising. So we're really excited to not just talk, but move to action. So if you get inspired by tonight and you have a lake in Lake County, Illinois that you would like to see change, or you'd like to learn more about it, please reach out and join our hardy team, because we have a lot of fun in the process. Back to you, Mary.
Yeah, we do. We do. And as Becky said, there is a real need. I'm hoping you're seeing the poll results right now. Majority of lakes are impaired, and a good chunk of them, 10%, are regularly closed. And we want to make sure they're all open and healthy and fueling our economies, our citizens, and our health. And thank you. I hope that, did you all see the poll results? I can't necessarily tell. Yes. Okay, great. So then, Dave, we're going to turn it over to you.
Okay. Thank you. Oops, hold on, I've got this.
Sorry.
So I think I want to start just by, why the focus on organic sediment. And the obvious thing is it's nutrient rich because it is decomposed, primarily vegetative material. So if it was on the land, we'd call it compost, or a lot of it is might be animal feces and things like that. We'd call it manure. So it's the very same stuff that we use to make vegetation grow on the land. And that's why, as this nutrient-rich sediment accumulates, you start getting weeds. If the water's too deep, you'll start getting algae. And the real risk is, over time, once you have a high proliferation of algae, the balance in a eutrophic lake, because eutrophic conditions favor cyanobacteria, tends to shift towards toxic cyanobacteria, harmful algae blooms. So that's why dealing with the sediment is so critical, because it's kind of the root cause of everything. And as Jeff said, there's basically two things you can do. You can physically dredge. It's extremely expensive. You can't really do much in deep lakes. We've shown that we can buy dredge depths down to 35, 40, 45 feet. Physically dredging, that's more or less impossible. It's very messy. The picture that Jeff showed you at the end there illustrates that. And often what happens is people have to, once it's dried out, put it into trucks and truck it away to a dump site. That's extremely expensive and can really mess up your roads, and that brings in another cost. The process often stirs up a lot of sediment, and that in itself will stimulate blooms. which means the nutrients get captured and then settle down and recreate sediment. Or you can bio-dredge, which is what we're all about. So how do we do that? First thing, if we address the whole microbes thing, we need to understand this. The idea of putting microbes in really comes from wastewater treatment. And what happens in a wastewater treatment plant, and we do a lot of work in that, this is the sort of situation you have. You have your fecal sludge coming in. That is digested by microbes, and as the microbes flourish and proliferate, you get a microbial sludge. And this plant here was basically receiving double its design capacity. So what you have here, it looks a real mess. That's not actually fecal sludge. That is the microbial sludge that is being created by the microbes taking up the nutrients and so on. So you've really converted one sludge into another. But as you can see, if you don't have enough oxygenation, if you don't have enough retention time, the process is only half complete and you're left with a problem. So the principle is exactly the same. What we did here is turn off that aeration system and put in an oxygenation system of our own design. You can see the difference in the color of the water. You can see that that's a different environment. And this is then the very same clarifier where the treated water is coming in, and the camera will pan up so you can see it is in fact the same place. Some people have a propensity for showing you before and afters, which are two completely different places. And so this is why using microbes in a lake is often not a good idea, because the microbes are going to produce a sludge and you're self-defeating straight away. What you have to do is oxygenate. And as Jeff said, it's what is most critical is that interface between the water and the sediment, that benthic margin, as we call it. If that is not oxygenated, you're not going to have aerobic digestion. You're going to have anaerobic bacteria. And even if you put aerobic bacteria in there, they're not going to be able to survive and function because they need oxygen. Then we digest enzymatically. Like I say, the logic behind that is enzymes work directly. The microbes will produce enzymes in order to digest the sediment. Similar sort of concept you use in a knife and fork. You've got to put some work in to break it down into bite-sized chunks. At the biochemical level, that's a similar idea. Enzymes are not living organisms. They are biochemical catalysts. Another advantage they have is they save the microbes the expenditure of energy required to produce their own enzymes. So we're building in more efficiency into the biochemical process. And then what you need is a well-oxygenated lake so that you have a robust food web which can consume and clear the biomass produced by the nutrients. So I was asked to keep it very short and get into the details. The key things that you'll see here is how far things have come as far as being able to measure this sort of stuff. Jeff was talking 2015, 2016. We really only started in 2017. It was really only then that this sort of technology was available. I'm going to take you through 3 case studies. Lake Rogerine in New Jersey, there's an aerial view of it the day we began the program. And you can see it's basically topped out shore to shore with primarily milfoil and pondweed. The sonar scanning is the big development in terms of measuring and monitoring this sort of stuff. This is a scan. When we do the scan, it detects the density of the weeds in the water. So where it's red, you've basically got 100% of the water column, from top to bottom is made up of weeds. And it goes through a gradation from red to orange to yellow to green to blue. So where there's blue, which is usually the deeper parts, you don't have any weeds. So that was a situation beforehand. That's the sort of view you get. We use this bathymetric data, and you can see there we've got the contours, which means we can measure quite accurately what the depth is. But what we can also do is put a transect and look at it in profile. So this is the profile of that lake before we began the program. Because the lake was topped out with weeds, they decided to apply herbicide. Now, that's not something we normally favor, because all you're doing is killing the biomass off and creating more sediment. But in this instance, we said, well, go ahead. And what we did was, about 2 months after they'd done that, all the weeds had died down and decomposed, we went and did another scan. And what that showed was that the average depth had reduced by 1/2 foot. And 7,000 cubic yards of water had been lost, because 7,000 cubic yards of sediment additional sediment had been created from a single application of herbicides. So this was then our starting point when we started with the program and the enzyme treatments. And 2 years later, that is what the depth profile looked like. We had taken the depth from 5.8 feet to 7.1 feet, so 15 inches deeper on average in 2 years, and increased the water volume from 91,000 cubic yards to 104. So that's 13,000 cubic yards of sediment that we got rid of. Oh, sorry, 19,000 cubic yards. That is the weed map afterwards. So all that red and yellow and so on's gone. The weeds are right out, and that is an aerial view. So that is the view across the lake, and that is the change in the sediment. Moving on to Austin Lake in Michigan, this is different in that the problem here was lily pads. And same sort of thing, we've got the bathymetric data. This was it 2017, I believe? I can't see it. Yep. Again, we look at it in profile. We can then go back and have a look 2 years later. You can see visually the depth has changed, the contours, and we can measure and quantify how much deeper it is. That is the weed heat map, and you can see what the problem was majorly around the shoreline, where the lily pads were so dense that people couldn't get into the lake to swim or to kayak or fish or do anything, and access to the lake was being impeded. That is 2 years later. The interesting thing here was that at the end of the first year, virtually nothing had happened. And we figured that the tubers that hold the lily pads into the sediment were, let's say, 8 inches deep, and we had digested about 6 inches, so not much happened. But from April, May, the second year, as soon as we started dosing, they started coming free. They were reporting tubers 10, 12 feet long and as thick as a man's thigh. That's an aerial shot from Google Earth before we started, and that is 2 years later. And then in terms of, is this a maintenance thing or not, we would beg to differ in that we believe we've developed it to, it's an active bio-dredging mechanism. And this is Roland Lake in Virginia. We've got 5 years data on it. Now, if you look beforehand, on the right-hand side here, which is actually at the north end, that's a 2-foot contour. This is a 3-foot contour, so very, very shallow up here. And if we look at it in profile, you see how shallow it is up that end of the lake. This is a 30-acre lake. Basically, anything less than 10 feet deep was completely overtaken by weeds. And you'll see that there in that heat map. That is, in essence, the 10-foot contour is where it goes blue, and anything less than 10 foot was completely topped out with weeds. This is the depth profile 5 years later. Where we had 2-3 feet, we've got a 5-foot contour, we've got a 6-foot contour there, we've got a 7-foot contour here. So we're feet deeper. If we look at it in profile, that is the difference where all that organic sediment was. You mentioned, somebody asked, what is the percentage of organic? You have to understand how that is measured. It's measured by weight. So in other words, what they do is dry out the sediment and weigh it. They then put it in an incinerator, in essence, and incinerate all the organics and then weigh it again. So it's done by mass. Now, the best way to consider sediment is the inorganic, the sand and so on, which will settle very quickly. Think of that as being steel ball bearings. And think of the organic matter as being those styrofoam peanut chips. So if you take a sample of that, 80% of the weight is going to be inorganic ball bearings, and 20% of the weight is going to be styrofoam chips. But by volume, 80% of the volume is styrofoam chips, and only 20% of the volume is sand and sediment. So we've had the exact same situation where we've done the analysis beforehand. We've had 13%, 15%, 18% organics, and people say, well, is it worth dredging? Absolutely, because you're trying to get the volume of sediment away. You're not trying to measure the weight. Just to drill into a bit more detail, that is the 5-foot contour in 2017. There it is laid out on the lake. And if we look 5 years later, you can see how much it's pushed out. Now, we can measure the number of acres there, and I think it's something like 10 or 12 acres originally was 5 feet or deeper. Now, I think it's 28, 22 acres is 5 feet or deeper. So, with this modern scanning technology, you've got real ability to quantify this quite accurately. This is then the 8-foot contour. And again, we can look at it in 2017, look at it in 2022, and compare the two. And that's your difference in the weed density. And so the weeds are cleared out by depriving them of that nutrient-rich sediment that allows them to grow. Lastly, like I say, we have 5 years data here, and we've got it in all sorts of different ways of measuring it. If we look at the cubic yards, we had 250,000 cubic yards of water in that lake when we started. At the end of the first year, we had digested 47,000 cubic yards of sediment. So the amount of water had increased by 47,000. By the end of the second year, we'd digested a total of 100,000. Interestingly enough, in 2020, not much happened. Well, that's because of COVID and travel restrictions, no dosing was done. So that shows you whether the dosing works or not, because once we picked it up again in 21 and 22, you can see we've continued. We've digested away 138,000 cubic yards, which means the water volume's gone up from 250,000 to 388,000. That's a 55% increase in the water stored in that lake. And if we just look at the average depth, the average depth has gone up 3 feet, average across the whole lake, 2.8 feet, from 5.1 to 7.9 feet. So, it is a sustainable, consistent, effective method. It's a fraction of the cost. And once you have the system up and running and installed, and you've got the dosing done and so on, it's a gift that keeps on giving, because we keep dredging it away until we get back to a hard bottom. There we go.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dave. And I know Wayne has observed a lot of Dave's work over the past 5 to 6 years. Maybe you could comment, Wayne, on what is the value of the multi-level method, which you've written about, and then why this impacts HABs, the harmful algae blooms.
Well, I think the main thing is that these are methods that currently exist. They've never just been put into the right context in the right order. And so I think that's the beauty of it. And so the more you test it out, the more you have positive results, the bigger that database becomes. I see, again, the key thing really is, how do you get rid of those sediments without having to dredge them? And digestion is really the way to go, because that's the natural process. It's the same reason Dave explained. And so getting the aerators into the right place and getting the right oxygen, I don't see any reason why microbes themselves couldn't work, but enzymes certainly make more sense. I think they're a bit, I don't know what the cost is, but they certainly are more directed at what your end goal is. The nutrient enrichment, which is really the third step to try and shift algal populations, depends on whether that's one of the main goals. The examples Dave's showing and even Jeff, getting rid of the macrophytes is really what you were after in those cases. So, and the nutrient enrichment, shifting, from cyanobacteria to good algae like diatoms and green algae, I just haven't seen enough good results from that. We know it can work, it makes sense, it's logical, but we haven't enough good examples that I feel comfortable talking about that so much, but it certainly works. So I guess that's what I see is this multi-level, more thoughtful application of existing methods gets you beyond the idea that you have to pick one method and keep trying it and having to come back to it and tweak it. Certainly beats, alum and trying to flocculate out algae and applying chemicals to kill the macrophytes and algae for that matter. I guess one question was, when those big macrophytes did float up, did they let them naturally digest, Dave, or were those physically removed, or is that physical? Is that possible at that point?
Well, in that case, they physically removed them because they were big floating masses of lily pads, so they were taking them out and physically removing them.
Right. So, mostly what I see are cyanobacteria and algae related problems and how you approach that, and that's where I would like to see more of the actual nutrient shifting. In any case that I've ever seen, whether it's lakes in the US or nationally, dredging always creates more problems than it since, you see the immediate results. And the size of the bubbles, I've seen nano bubbles and micro bubbles, and that's basically what Dave's doing, but it's how it's applied. But when I've seen examples of nano bubbles used, say with ozone or something, well, again, you're just killing things, you're not removing them. So I think, the whole idea of getting the natural cycles going gets you to the end point, maybe not as quickly. And so that's always the task, is to convince people to give it 2 or 3 years. Let's not expect to see something at the end of the summer. So I guess that would be, my context. And I have seen other examples personally close up that Dave didn't talk about that have worked in much the same way. So
Yeah, excellent.
most recently one, in Missouri, Indian Lake. I was on a Zoom call with a group that was looking at another lake in Pennsylvania to apply that technique to, but they had the person on who was behind the Indian Lake, which is another one of Dave's projects. And of course, they were just, very pleased with the results. Not necessarily the first year, but certainly by the second year.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And when we talked to the village of Libertyville or places that have done the mechanical dredging, as you said, Wayne, it is so disruptive and so very costly, but also for all those people who are concerned about the health of a lake, you basically destroy the lake and uprooting everything to get rid of,
Yeah, unless you can turn an economic dollar off those sediments that you're going to remove, they end up somewhere and usually cause as many problems there as they did in the lake.
Yeah.
You can't get a permit to dump them anywhere.
Exactly. Yeah, the permits, everything.
Yeah. So Frank's going to just check. Thank you. I think there were a few other questions, but I put a question in the chat I'd like everyone to chime in on at the end. Just put in your thinking cap. How do we get the word out to more that we have an alternative to mechanical dredging that is more affordable and more expedient here? But
I think it's also important to say that, not every lake is the same as well. And there are lakes that you just do have to dredge. So if you've got a reservoir, or at least in my opinion anyways, that it's all eroded sand and eroded material in it, this kind of stuff is just not going to cut it.
You can't bio-dredge sand. Yeah, you can't bio-dredge inorganics. Biologically it has to be organic. Yeah, agreed.
Yeah,
and the other thing, as Jeff said earlier, the trouble is people are wanting instant gratification.
Instant.
So
yeah,
every year the weeds grow, and every year they put a herbicide, and they go, and every year they get instant gratification, but it gets worse and worse and worse every year as you do that.
Yeah, good point though, Jeff. And other Frank, questions in the chat?
Couple things here is one, which I don't think applies, but are the microbes naturally ubiquitous? We're not talking about microbes, we're talking about enzymes, right?
We are here, yeah. I mean, microbes are ubiquitous.
Okay.
But if you don't have the right conditions and so on for them to be able to function. They're not going to function.
Yeah, and then the other is, and Rick Stein, it's a very, very good point, because we went around in circles for almost 2 years in Michigan. The biggest challenge seems to be getting government agencies to understand this concept and to give it a chance. They are so, government agencies, of what we found, are so into their own testing, because they're, I don't know whether it's employment or what it is, but we worked with a lake in West Bloomfield that they had been tested for 6 years, and they still would not give a permit to do anything more than to do more testing. So it's in the last, even before today's presentation, I feel enzymes should be looked at as dredging just spreads the mess.
Yep.
Right? Enzymes should be looked at dredging, dredging, yeah. And I would like to know if any special measures are being taken to dispose of the waste once it has been removed. I mean, that's, that's an issue, because we dealt with that also in Michigan, where they got a permit to dredge, but they couldn't get a permit to dump the stuff anywhere. Any other thoughts there?
Yeah, just to be clear, we're not using nanobubbles as such.
Right.
And in many ways, this, what size of the bubbles and micro, nano, mini, whatever is a bit of a distraction and red herring. The only way to know whether it's working or not is measure the dissolved oxygen at the bottom. If you haven't got dissolved oxygen at the bottom, it doesn't matter what they called it, it didn't perform. There was a thing in the paper today, there's $1 million aeration system in Vermont, which has been in for 5 years. They've shut it down and taken it out because it's just consistently made the lake worse. And that's toxic cyanobacteria. So, because it didn't oxygenate the lake.
Yeah.
So in Kelly Brown, there's a lot of information in the HCV2 document. HCV2 actually talks about herbicides, which is what we're saying here is not the solution. That actually feeds the problem, I believe. I'm not correct. Then she says strategy for preventing and managing harmful cyanobacteria. She gives some links here. HCB1 strategies for preventing and managing benthic harmful cyanobacteria blooms. Another link. Do you want to comment on that, Kelly? I mean, against what we've heard here. Is Kelly?
Muted
Is
right
it muted?
now, so.
Yeah.
Off camera.
Maybe not.
Yeah, go ahead and unmute Kelly if you want to talk about that. She's unmuted.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Sorry. A lot.
Is your phone on, Kelly? You gotta hang up your phone. There you go.
Is that good?
That's
Perfect.
good. There you go. You want to comment
Can you
on
hear
what
me?
you put in the chat?
No.
There you are. Kelly, are you there?
We can hear you.
I hear you typing.
So tech problems. Totally understand.
Having technology, okay, that's okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. So those are all the questions that were in the chat.
Great. There were a few others just that have been asked beforehand in the questions that came in. And Wayne, I think perhaps you could comment on the health impacts of, we have some lakes that have regular toxic HABs problems, and how far, or is there a resource you'd recommend we look at for the implications to a municipality that is not able to get a lake under control, or for its citizens?
Well, even with the harmful algal blooms, the HABs, there are problems whether they're toxic or non-toxic. If they're toxic, obviously the health risk is considerably more for animals and humans in particular. But even when they're just obnoxious floating mats of scum, they cause the same issues, in a different way, whether it's to the, fish populations, the ability that you can't use the water for recreation in particular. And of course, it increases the treatment costs extensively to have to treat those kind of, you can imagine a foot of scum trying to go through a water treatment plant and be handled by their filtration systems. They're backflushing far too often and far too expensive. And stressing those blooms in a water treatment plant tends to release any toxins that might otherwise have been taken on and through with the removal of the algal cells. So I think the HABs, I don't know whether you balance out whether it's HABs or macrophytes that are more of the issue. I think HABs are probably more of a health risk issue and an environmental issue and an economic issue. I don't know what else to say. I'm sure that that is it Kelly, that group that she's part of. I've followed their workshops a little bit, and they're and those manuals like the HCB1 and HCB2 harmful cyanobacteria bloom manuals. They're very useful. But I think almost every state in every country has something equivalent to that they have up on their websites now. One of the things I've noticed is that almost every state has to have an HCB website to at least alert people. And one of my real issues is that, for at least 50 or 60 years now, we've done an awful lot of monitoring and measuring. And my real concern and argument is, gee, how can we get beyond that? Because even today, it's much easier to get funding to continue your monitoring and just apply some new technique like satellite imagery or other kinds of sensing or molecular sensing. And that's all very good, but where is it headed? If it's not headed towards, remediation and prevention, I think you really need to question where you're putting your money.
Yeah, but Wayne, that's hard. That takes work.
It does.
It takes a lot of work to remediate and to do something.
And I've been beating on that for a long time. And
Mary
even my
just put in the
own
chat.
colleagues, even my own colleagues push back because, and part of it is they say, well, where are the peer-reviewed publications? Show us that these methods that Dave is, having more success with work and put it out there so we can replicate it. That's what instead of going out and proving it for themselves, I think, and that's a bit of a side criticism from my point of view, is that they're much more inclined to wait for somebody to show it and then go out and reprove it than it is to figure out how to do it themselves. That's hard.
Very true. And since you've given your presentation to the industry 2 years ago, and you'd like to see this happen more quickly than others, what have you seen success? Have you seen the adaptation? And does anyone in the group want to just chime in, raise their hand with ideas? How can we spread the word, as Jeff said, to the appropriate places where organic sediment could be removed? But Wayne, what's giving you hope these days for this remedy?
Well, it's slow, but I think just more examples of applying these more thoughtful methods that we already have and showing that they work, and then convincing groups like you to continue it and, inform other groups that are like-minded. And that's the slowest process. When I made those presentations on that methodology 2 years ago, I had very strong pushback. And I haven't seen the change. And from my area, the next international conference of toxic cyanobacteria is next May, actually in Greece, and we've had our first sort of organizing committee, and I'm still having trouble getting to put a session into that conference on remediation and prevention, as they're still, as far as they want to go, is monitoring and management. Which basically repeats what we've already known for a long time. So yeah, so So need some help, Jeff.
So going with that, the question, what peer-reviewed journals would validate the process, are respected enough to validate the process?
Oh, there are lots. There are probably too many now. One of the issues with journals, and there's a fairly significant article that just came out showing how, unfortunately, there are so many journals that they're accepting papers that have to be retracted, and that's becoming more of an issue, which makes it more difficult for us to convince the public that scientists know what they're talking about. But there are still many reputable journals. They aren't hard to find. It's just getting the data together and getting them in there and getting those editors and the reviewers to accept it.
So we're going to be publishing, I think, very shortly, from Dave, some detailed case studies on some of the work that he's done, which will have the science and the, certainly the overview, but also the science for credibility in them, and we'll publish those on Global Waterworks.
Yeah, I don't know how to quite answer that. Dave can too. I've given Dave. Go ahead, Dave.
No, so I'll get hold of Kelly's details and send us some stuff.
Right. Good. I put both of the emails in the chat for Dave and for Jeff. So anyone who wants to get in touch, I find it most interesting that Jeff is actually, his team has been very active here in Lake County, actually working with some of the septic analysis of the flows into the lake. And Dave brings international experience, but as you heard, we'll have more case studies in the community. And we also saw the value of children interacting with the lakes. So next month, we hope to have some exposure to all of the fun things that are available through Lake Lovers. And so mark your calendar for the third Thursday. And I'm just going to put the link in so everyone can join if you haven't yet, the Lake Lover community, and just follow the calendar and take part in our activities. But we invite you to also invite others to the community, because it's only when we're all active and taking a personal role. And Sri, maybe you could comment on that, because you are activating people through Rotary and through Lions. Any suggestions? You're new to this group. Would you provide some encouraging words to how we spread the word on this opportunity? You're muted, so I'm asking you to unmute there.
Oh, okay. I'm trying to unmute.
There.
Anyway, I feel like a total alien. This is all extremely new to me. I never knew water was a problem, other than I've been drinking it for 74 years, I guess. But I'm a physician. It reminds me of what we go through constantly. We know preventive medicine works and it's cheaper, and we know mental health is half of the problem on physical illnesses, and we need coverage for that and dealing with that. But traditional medicine doesn't want to accept it. I've been practicing physician for 50 years, but AMA and the pharmaceutical controls, people have so many controls, and like Dave pointed out, everybody, and I think Jeff pointed out, everybody wants a quick fix. If you want to exercise and eat right, and take care of your stress, heart attacks will significantly decrease. But people want statins and bypass quickly, and so I know there's no payment for long-term change in behavior. And so same thing looks like in water. I hear all of you excited, but at the same time saying, well, there is restrictions, there is government stopping us, people won't listen to us, it's not in peer-reviewed journals. And I've been all over the world to study pain, and there's so many how we manage pain in America is disgraceful, actually. And there's so many better ways of doing it, but it just won't be allowed here. How pain is managed in China or Russia or Brazil or South Africa or in most places around the world is extremely different than what we do here. So you don't see the opioid crisis in those countries. We don't see the excessive surgery in those countries. people don't even expect immediate relief. They just live with their pain and say, oh, so long as nothing bad, they say, I can deal with that. But here, everybody wants a fix. Nobody wants to invest or change old behaviors. And looks like Wayne has been working at it for 50 years and still has some hope for there's a talk, looks like he gave recently on about what's going to happen in the next 50 years or something. So there are people in medicine who say the same thing, and hopefully we think it's happening. People are getting it, preventive medicine, and it's slowly coming down. So long as corporations finally got in there and said, okay, exercise, we're going to put exercise bicycle, people got in there, nutritional people got in there. So there's some movement, but it's still big pharma and big medicine. It's not going to let decent, normal, simple things to take care of people or the lakes. And I'm sounding depressing, but
No, Becky, you were going to say something.
I think it's always hard to change.
Truth is sometimes depressing.
Yet, I have found that if we can convince a small group of people to try a small pilot, right? My favorite 5-letter word is a pilot. So all of these case studies are really powerful. Obviously, I'm a science person. Data, that can be replicated is where I stand, and rather than magic fairies, I wish there are magic fairies, but data speaks really volumes. And I think if money is the universal measuring stick. So if we can make a proposal that says this is far cheaper, if it's the right type of lake, if it's a biological problem with sediment, and it's cheaper than mechanical dredging. I don't know, I've just been thinking about the surge in, at least around the Chicagoland area over the years, right? People are willing to spend more money to buy organic produce or shop at a local farmer's market. Is that a trend that we could capitalize on and say, do you want to try to treat, the fish that you fish, maybe you eat some of those fish, or you want your children to swim in this lake? Do you want it to be more natural, or do you want it to have chemicals? So, maybe that's an angle from a marketing perspective that could be considered. But really exciting that there's something finally out there that sounds like it's working in certain circumstances, rather than just scooping it all up with a big machine, and then we don't know what to do with it.
I will add too, there was a question before about permitting. So in Indiana, this particular study, all we had was a 1-page permit for the solar bee. Just slide it in. The
Right.
dredging required US Army Corps and the state, whole different ball game. So I don't know what it's like in other states, but I would imagine permitting is not even a thing with this alternative type of treatment. And that saves you a lot of cost right there.
That is great. Yeah, it is a state-by-state issue. Wayne, did you want to comment on that?
Well, I think,
oh, sorry.
well, just quickly, I think the permitting issue with Dave's methods comes more with the nutrients, not so much with the aeration and the enzymes, although the enzymes are screened as well. But nutrients seems to be a hang up, because why are you adding nutrients to a system that's already nutrient rich? So that's a little harder, but you get a long ways down the road just with proper aeration, siting, and oxygenation and the enzyme treatment. So that's a little easier to permit.
Just to follow up Wayne's comment, even a comparison in medicine is that 15, 20 years ago, they began to say, unless it's proved by multi-center, double-blind studies, and it has to be first double-blind, then they said it's going to be multiple center, then you got to meet certain criteria, that came from England, and there's all kinds of institutes. You got to meet that criteria. Then you have to be published in several reputable journals. And then with the COVID, we have learned like Lancet and JAMA and all the reputable journals published nonsense and constantly had to retract almost everything they published. So there's very little trust in science these days, unfortunately. So I think Science Magazine stands out. I'm sure in water area, there must be something like that, global water, somebody mentioned, that something that's considered standard, and that's where, unless it's published there. And again, Lancet and Journal of American Medical Association and the British medical journals were considered the standard. And now they're not, because a New England Journal of Medicine has taken a deep dive in regards to their reputation by publishing anything and everything in this competitive race. And I mean, half the articles had to be withdrawn, like Wayne pointed out. So it's a difficult time to make these kind of changes.
Yeah. Thank
Well,
you.
I would just say, sorry, Mary, that this Lake County group you have, I would encourage you to, pick a lake and decide this is the one we're going to try and push as a test case and get another example going. And I'm sure that, you'll get support from Dave, but the financial support is largely up to you, unfortunately. So, but that's okay. It takes one step at a time, but that's, you have the resources, you have the group resources. Now you need the financial resources and someplace you can apply this to. And I know you have lots of lakes and there's a system for them and everything. I don't know which one would be better, but I'm sure you could be advised which one would be likely to give you some more immediate results, which then lead you to be able to move on and do more of the lakes.
Yeah, well,
So good luck.
Wayne, your validation has meant so much. And some people who could be on today's call have always asked, can we ask Wayne Carmichael, would he validate this process? And you already have. Did you want to add anything to that question that they have?
No, I mean, I've seen probably a dozen cases now, and then I've seen another dozen where it hasn't worked so well or not at all or detrimentally. And in all those cases that haven't worked, it's because the methodology hasn't been applied in the correct fashion or manner or sequence. So that should tell you something significant.
Yeah. That's excellent. Wayne, thank you so much for joining us, and for Dave and Jeff and Tom. Everyone on this call I know has a heart to see change, and Dave Gewalt and Will, maybe you have ideas for those lakes that we can do. But all of you are invited to stay in touch through the community, and just give one last ask if anyone wants to raise their hand and share, what do we need to do to get this out? Kelly put in a nice post. This was the most promising information she's heard, but
get media coverage somehow to cover. It looks like what Dave said was very exciting, and get some big media, CBS News, somebody, at PBS to cover this.
Absolutely.
And say this can be done without expense, and it's a long process. PBS can present a good documentary on it, and that'll reach people, and eventually have a little snippet on BBC News or something. Then we'll get credibility more than publications, I think.
And Stacy, chime in.
Mary, we just finished our budget, and of course we've been talking about the muck eaters or enzymes, microbes. And several years ago, somebody here on Island Lake did use them, but their scientific data keeping was not supreme. For instance, they used an old ore to measure the change in sediment, and they'd mark the ore. But we did budget this year to try this somewhere on Island Lake. And I think that whole idea of a demonstration project goes a long way. And what made me think of this is we're also in the middle of doing a native buffer demonstration project with Integrated Lakes Management about shoreline stabilization. And I think this is going to be the same kind of thing, right? You have to set it up and keep the data in a way that those that are interested, you can get it out to them, and encourage over time, because a demonstration project is over time. Let's see what happens over time. I think you have to prove it in some way. And then, kind of like Wayne said, that some have failed. And if it fails, that's okay too, right? So we did budget the best we could, but what we're having a hard time with, and I'll talk to other people about this, is where do we put it? I had thought initially on the channel where the shoreline demonstration project is going on, but that's where our water is gushing through. So I'm kind of hearing that we need a more stagnant, sediment-rich area, right? So we're taking a look at some of our non-water moving bays because we're a man-made lake and we've got all these little bays that just fill up with sediment. So we're thinking picking one of those where there's not a lot of water movement and starting a demonstration project with this. It's going to be slow, I get it, but we're going to start it this year. Trial.
I think, Stacey, just from our point of view, it doesn't need to be stagnant. Part of the design process, we'll look into the the turnover rate, the flow rates, and things like that. We design for that. It doesn't have to be stagnant. We actually have a project going in Utah now, which is a river, where obviously you've got constantly moving water, and we are oxygenating that water all the way down the line of the river. So we can design for that. It doesn't have to be stagnant or isolated.
Okay, that's good to know.
Oh.
Mostly, we know that most of our problem is the channel coming in, and that's why that was my first place to go. And as people are learning, we're having discussions and arguments and disagreements, and we will get with the experts before we go ahead. But thank you. Thank you for supporting my idea.
No problem.
Great. And Dave passes through here regularly. He'll let us know next time he's up in the area. And I guess I've asked if anyone else wants to raise their hand. Stacy did. Last call.
What you need is a big billionaire to support this. Get a person like Peter Thiel or our Microsoft guy, because we've raised $2 billion in Rotary, and he's given $6 billion to batch that, to eradicate polio. It's taken so much time, 20 years to do that, but finally he's agreed to match 3-to-1 every time we raise something. So we are doing the final push on it. But somebody like that who invests money into it, and then he's got ulterior motives. He owns the vaccine company. So Bill Gates can do all kinds of stuff. He can support COVID, but he invests in the vaccine companies, so he gets his money back somehow. But
Yeah.
so or the government, somebody in the government needs to get a little inkling that they could, politician, that this would be a good way to do something, and then that's only going to make it a big time change.
Yeah, and I think that's some of the work that we're doing with SIS.BIO and CleanFlow, getting that story together in a easy to understand way that comes across in a short message, whether it's social media, other platforms, whatever the case may be, or a website even. And then finding people that can influence. That's going to be a big part of what we're looking at going forward.
The first one Mary can help you with. She's the public relations expert. She can take whatever you give her and somehow make it sound great and put it out. But then you need to get somebody's heart to beat with that, and then put that money.
Absolutely.
So, Dave, if you would connect with Kelly Brown, she'd like to know more
Will
about
do.
your river solution,
Yeah.
Mhm.
Jeff,
and what's
we'll
going on with the river,
make
which I
those
think is
connections, but I think we heard some people who could be on our committees here. So I put the Lake County Lake Lover link in here, and we'll do a follow-up, send out the recording of today's program, and invite your referrals to the community. As Becky said, our lakes are orphans, and they need our help. And Frank and I and Becky and Stacy and Dave and Cindy are here to support you. And we really value what we learned was that the high schools also say they need experts like yourselves. So thank you, all of you experts, for lending your knowledge tonight. And we hope you'll join us June 20th. I put the link in there for the event, and you can just RSVP or just ping us anytime. But I'd just like to say a blessing over everyone for the time that you've spent here tonight and for the beauty of creation that is in front of us every day. We're out on the lake. Lord, we just thank you. And we ask that you would return the time to everyone who was here and multiply the work of their hands, that we might see the beauty of your lakes, replenish us, restore us, rejuvenate our economies and our health. And we thank you also for the health advice provided here tonight, and just look forward to working together in community to bring this all to pass. So,
Amen.
Yeah, amen. Thank you for inviting me.
yeah, thank you all for being here. We'll keep things going in the community. And Wayne, you were the spark. So we're going to carry on, and we're going to come out there and then visit your salmon habitat when you're ready to have us.
You're all welcome, sure.
Yeah. Well,
Thanks.
God
Bye.
bless. Thank you,
Thank you.
innovators, for keeping on.